The envelope was thick, not the kind that carried affection, the kind that carried decisions already made. It slid across the polished oak table and stopped at my knuckles as if it knew exactly where to die. No one spoke. Silverware rested. Wine breathed. My wife didn't look at me. She looked through me, at a version of me she'd been rehearsing this moment with. I felt the paper's weight without touching it. Legal stock. Crisp. Confident. Across from me, her brother adjusted his cufflinks. He smiled like a surgeon before anesthesia. "Just a formality," he said. Formality. That word people use when they don't want to say extraction. I waited. I let the silence do what it always does, make liars uncomfortable, make predators rush. My wife finally cleared her throat. The sound was small, practiced. "It's for everyone's peace," she said. Peace. The word echoed in my head while I stared at the envelope, while I thought about the shell companies, the blind trusts, the night calls with bankers who didn't know my face but knew my voice. $4 billion quietly propping up the empire built on this very table's laughter. They had no idea who fed them. I slid my thumb under the flap. Not yet. I wanted to see their eyes when they thought I was still hungry. Inside me, something ancient and precise woke up. Not anger, calculation. I married her because she mistook my silence for kindness, because she liked telling people I was simple, an honest man, a small man, safe. She liked that her world dwarfed mine, that my job title fit in one breath, that I never talked about money, power, leverage. She liked explaining things to me. Restaurants, investments, her brother's brilliant rise in hospitality. I listened, always listened. That night, between courses, I watched her do what she'd done for years, signal allegiance with tiny gestures, a hand on her brother's wrist, a look exchanged mid-sentence, private jokes I was never meant to understand. The betrayal wasn't sudden, it was cumulative. I remembered the late nights she said were charity events, the way her phone stayed face down, the soft disdain that crept into her voice when she talked about ambition, my lack of it, my contentment. Contentment frightened her. The envelope wasn't the betrayal, it was the confession. I finally opened it. A post-nuptial agreement, waivers, clauses, language so clean it bled. It suggested I relinquish any claim to future earnings tied to family enterprises. It assumed dependency, ignorance, consent. I looked up. My wife's eyes were wet, but her jaw was firm. She'd practiced this face, vulnerable but resolved. The face of someone who believed I'd sign because I didn't know better. What hurt wasn't the money. It was realizing I had been a case study, a controlled variable, the poor man they could corner, test, manage. I folded the papers neatly. "Let me think," I said. Relief washed over them like champagne. I didn't sleep that night. I audited accounts, messages, calendars. I had access to more than they knew, not because I spied, but because people who underestimate you don't lock doors. I pulled phone records, not content, patterns. Calls that clustered around her brother's travel, messages that spiked after board meetings, gaps that coincided with my business trips, the ones I told her were dull, forgettable. They weren't. I watched her for weeks. I watched how she leaned away when I touched her, how she used my name like punctuation, how she talked about we only when others were listening. I never confronted. I never flinched. I commissioned an audit of the hospitality empire through a third-party firm that didn't know who their ultimate client was. The numbers came back clean on the surface, too clean, the kind of clean that hides desperation, cash flow issues, debt masked as expansion. The empire was floating because someone, me, kept buying quietly when others hesitated. I requested internal emails through a legal pretext, found a thread. Her brother bragging about consolidating control, about handling the in-law, about making sure I stayed compliant. Compliant. That word followed me everywhere. At dinner, my wife kissed my cheek and asked if I'd thought about the papers. I smiled. I said soon. Inside, I was already planning the order of events. Truth first, then silence. The results arrived on a Tuesday, not in an envelope, in a folder. I invited her to sit with me. No raised voice, no accusations, just a table between us, neutral ground. I slid the folder toward her. She opened it, read the first page. Her breath caught, not dramatically, precisely, like a machine realizing it had been unplugged. Financial disclosures, ownership structures, voting power that didn't make sense unless you understood who I was. She flipped pages faster. Her hands started to shake. "What is this?" she whispered. I watched her face fracture as the realization assembled itself. The anonymous investor, the silent partner, the reason her brother's empire survived storms it shouldn't have. Me. "I wanted to see how you'd treat a poor man," I said. "Turns out you didn't disappoint." She cried then, not because she loved me, because she'd lost the narrative, the hierarchy, the illusion. "I was protecting us," she said. I nodded. "From me?" She couldn't answer. The next family dinner was shorter. I arrived early, sat at the head of the table. When her brother entered, I stood and shook his hand, firm, final. I placed a new envelope in front of him. Termination of funding, triggered clauses, debt acceleration, a timeline measured in days. He laughed at first, then he read. The color drained from his face in increments. He looked at my wife. She looked at the table. I didn't raise my voice. "I own the votes," I said. "I own the patience. You mistook my silence for permission." He tried to bargain. She tried to apologize. I listened, always listened. Then I stood. "I won't ruin you," I said. "You'll do that yourselves. I'm just stepping away." I left them with the bill. I moved out quietly. No drama, no announcements, just absence. I sold my shares over months, let the market do what it does to empires built on arrogance. I watched from a distance as headlines softened the fall with euphemisms. Strategic restructuring, leadership changes. I felt nothing. People ask if I miss her. I miss the man she thought I was. That man was useful, invisible, disposable. I'm not angry anymore. Anger requires attachment. What I have now is clarity, and clarity is colder than revenge.